Welcome, you guys. This is the American Shoreline Podcast, flagship show. My name is Peter Ravella. I'm the co-host of the show.
And I'm Tyler Buckingham. I am the other co-host of the show.
And we are so glad to be back on. The American Shoreline Podcast is going to be the flagship show of the American Shoreline Podcast Network. You'll hear from us every Monday morning, starting this week. We did the first show. And what we're going to do every week is give you an update on breaking news. We're going to talk about what is coming up on the American Shoreline Podcast Network, and we're going to cover subjects that are timely and relevant to what's going on in coastal news today. And for those of you who are new to the show, Coastal News Today is the website home of the American Shoreline Podcast Network. And we're really looking forward to having Coastal News Today fully up and running at the end of September and early October. So we'll be keeping you abreast of that as we go forward.
Absolutely. And we have an exciting show planned for you today. But first, let's have a quick word from our sponsor.
That's right. You know, I think one of the great things about the early development of the American Shoreline Podcast show is our sponsorship from ASBPA. And ASBPA, I think many of the listeners know is the American Shoreline, the American Shore and Beach Preservation Association. It is one of the national organizations dedicated to coastal issues in America. What we're happy to tell you is we are going to be at the ASBPA conference coming up this fall.
Absolutely, and you should be there too. This conference is going to run from October 30th through November 2nd. Truly one of the highlights of our year, and I know for so many people that attend, this is a can't-miss conference.
It really is. It is in Galveston, Texas. It'll be at the Galveston Island Convention Center, a really great venue on the seawall, first class in every respect. A couple of highlights of the conference we'd like to tell you about.
Well, there's over 200 presentations and posters that cover pretty much every coastal topic. There's, of course, a field trip. The great thing about these ASBPA conferences, Peter, is that you really get a flavor of the local beach and the local shore that you are on.
Yeah, I know the short course, which will be on Tuesday, October 30th, and it's an all-day event for those of you who want to get close and personal with Galveston, is a two-part day course with Ruben Trevino, the operations director for the Galveston Park Board of Trustees. He runs the beaches for the city and county of Galveston. Ruben is going to be doing a tour and talking about the complexity of beach operations. I think that's a great way to spend the morning on October 30th. And then all through the afternoon, there's a second class coming up on the afternoon of the 30th.
And, of course, we can't skip over the networking possibilities at ASBPA. After a day of the awesome presentations, it's always great to meet up with all the other conference goers and talk about what you learned. And, man, we look forward to it. We will, of course, be there. Coastal News Today and the American Shoreline Podcast Network will be active. We will have a booth for Coastal News Today. We will be podcasting, and just can't wait.
It's going to be really good. I think 3 shows will originate and be released during the conference. We're going to sit down with the executive director of ASBPA, that's Derek Brockbank, and we are also going to sit down with the keynote speaker for the conference, and we'll wrap it up on the third night with a show that brings together the participants of the conference to talk about the highlights and some of the presentations. It's going to be a great time in Galveston, and we sure hope to see everybody there at the ASBPA conference.
We sure hope to see you.
And to register, asbpa.org. There is a student rate for the young folks out there who want to attend. Early registration deadline is September 29th. If you register for the conference by that deadline, you'll save $50, and we'd encourage you to
Get on
ready.
the list. Get on the list. Pay the fee. Get there. It's well worth it.
Get to Galveston. So we want to thank ASBPA for being an early sponsor of this show and the American Shoreline Podcast Network. So, Tyler, 3 topics we want to go over today, and here's what you're going to hear today on the show.
Today we're going to take a few minutes to introduce some of our new shows that will be coming to ASPN. We're also going to take a quick moment to go over the 2018 hurricane season, which is beginning to heat up. And, of course, we're going to look into a couple stories that I'm following very closely from my podcast, The Beach Shack, on coastal real estate.
Right, and I think we haven't explained much about what ASPN is going to be, but we'd like to try to do that today. ASPN is a collection of shows dedicated to the subject matter of the American shoreline. We are going to have, I believe, more than 10 shows on the network, and those shows will be appearing over the fall. We're really excited about the variety of shows that we're putting together and the quality of the hosts that we have. You're going to hear from great professionals and practitioners on the coast, people who really know the inside of topics ranging from port and waterway operations to real estate to hospitality and tourism, coastal advocacy, coastal access and enjoyment of the shoreline. We've got some great shows and some great hosts.
And we really should begin by introducing our show on recreation and enjoyment, hosted by our good friend Rob Nixon of South Padre Island, Texas. His show is called The Next Swell, and Peter, it's gonna be killer. Yeah,
I tell you, when we talked to Rob over the course of this year about hosting a show on ASPN, I think it was, I was particularly thrilled when he agreed. Rob Nixon is a fantastic guy. He's a member of the National Surf Rider Board. He has worked on coastal access issues for a couple of decades now. He's down in South Padre, down in deep South Texas. And Rob also serves on the Shoreline Task Force for the city of South Padre Island. He's a real expert in coastal development, permitting, and regulation. He is a surfer, and he runs the carnival in South Padre, the permanent, well, it's the local
it's
carnival.
The Gravity Park.
It's the Gravity Park.
It's not the carnival.
I'm sorry. Rob will shoot me. It's the Gravity Park. So next time you're in South Padre, and I've done the Gravity Park, and they've got a really, really cool go-kart course to drive on. And anyway, Rob Nixon's show, The Next Swell, is going to cover coastal use and enjoyment of the coast. And it sounds simple, like, boy, guess we're going to the beach to build sandcastles. No, we're talking about the policy implications of access and development, the difficult reconciliation of user rights along the shoreline. Rob's been doing it for decades. He's going to be a great host. I'm so glad he's on ASPN.
We are so fortunate to have him hosting The Next Swell. Rob has a natural curiosity for everything coastal. And as you said, he's a surfer. He loves to be out there splashing in the water and enjoying the waves. So he'll bring a special sense of coastal enjoyment to that show, along with the technical expertise that you can come to expect on our network, and we just can't be more excited for it.
Yeah, I can't skip this. I have to tell you, Rob's got a couple of sons, young guys he's teaching to surf. They're already very good surfers. And they also play hockey. Rob is a huge fan of the Washington Capitals. And his sons participate in the champion Washington Capitals. And Rob's kids participate in the South Texas Youth Hockey League. And who knew that there was hockey in deep South Texas? But that's the kind of guy Rob is. He's really a great guy, and I think he'll be a great host.
You have to imagine you have to drive a few miles to find a good rink down there in the South Country.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about another show here that we're really excited about. We already mentioned our partnership with ASBPA. Their executive director, Derek Brockbank, will be hosting the Capitol Beach podcast.
Yeah, this is really an important show. We're going to have two shows originating from Washington, D.C. on federal coastal policy. Rob, as the executive director Derek as the executive director of ASBPA, is deeply involved in what happens in Congress at the federal level regarding federal shoreline investment, federal shoreline policy, FEMA, and a variety of significant issues that impact coastal communities all along the American shoreline. Derek is is just a great pro, and I'm looking forward to the kinds of discussions and the access to people in power in D.C. that he's going to bring on that show. It's going to be a great resource for everybody out there, whether you're a city council member or a mayor of a barrier island community or a port operator, because the federal government has a lot to do with what happens on the American shoreline, and Derek will be covering that beat for us on the Capitol Beach podcast.
It's going to be awesome. And of course, Derek will be joining us on this podcast from the conference, night one. We very much look forward to having him on then, and frequently. You know, Derek is a good friend of ours, and the work that he's doing there in Washington, D.C. is second to none when it comes to advocating for the coast. So
right.
We are just thrilled that he's going to be working with us.
Yeah. Show number 3 that I want to introduce is Tyler's show called The Beach Shack.
It's my show.
You know, coastal real estate, both the ownership and development and use of the land along the shoreline, is a incredibly complicated topic, and I think, Tyler, you're going to be a great guide through that topic.
Well, everybody that knows me knows that I am not a real estate agent, but I am truly interested in this world, so I'm going to approach this podcast as a student. I'm going to go find the greatest minds in coastal real estate and talk to them about what is making it shake. What are the highest markets right now, the hottest markets? What are the coldest? What's moving these trends? I'm going to talk about my experience growing up, going to a family beach house, which was near and dear to me, but I know very well the anxiety that having coastal property can create. There's always the threat of flooding and storms, and you're right there on the edge. So this is a podcast for all you coastal property owners or prospective coastal property owners that want to know what you're getting into. I'm also going to explore the way short-term renting is affecting coastal communities, and if you are Airbnb or short-term renting your coastal property, how to maximize your return on that, and how to do it responsibly and as a good neighbor.
Yeah, there's just so much to talk about in the coastal real estate subject area, both in terms of individual property owners. The condominium association community in Florida is massive. We're going to try to work to speak to them, but we're also looking at the investment side of this and the economics and the policy considerations that go with coastal real estate. A huge issue, of course, is the variable rights between private property ownership, the constitutionally protected property rights of shorefront owners, and the public's right to access. And this is a really, and I think I mentioned it in the last show, really complicated area. And I find fascinating as someone who administered one of these coastal management programs for a state, at the state of Texas. But the real estate show, the Beach Shack, is going to be a really great show to listen to, whether you're an owner, an investor, or a prospective buyer, or looking at the economy of the American shoreline. I'm sure we're going to get into taxes somewhere in the Beach Shack.
Absolutely.
And
taxes and flood insurance.
Oh my gosh, there's a lot to talk about.
It will be fun.
The Beach Shack. So glad, Tyler, you're going to be hosting that show.
I'm really looking forward to it, Peter.
the fourth show we wanted to introduce you to today, and we're only going to go about halfway down the list of shows in this podcast, but another one that I'm really looking forward to listening to and am thrilled about is Michael Poff's show called Podcast for Building Better Beaches. I love it. The acronym or the initials for this show is P4B cubed, Podcast for Building Better Beaches. Michael Poff, president of Coastal Engineering Consultants from Naples, Florida, a real experienced coastal engineer, and somebody who is, I think, expert in shoreline restoration engineering, and really looking forward to hearing from Michael Poff.
Michael, Peter, is so darn skilled at taking complex engineering theory and distilling it into a description that the layperson can understand. He's not afraid to go and tackle any of the complex subject matter that exists in that realm.
The controversies.
Absolutely.
The debates.
Absolutely. And being a practitioner in Florida, of course, he's pretty much seen it all.
He has.
Of course, we're talking about sand sourcing, permitting, reef mitigation,
right?
Erosion control line issues. If you are in any way familiar with the world of beach renourishment and trying to maintain shorelines through engineering methods, this show will interest you.
Indeed. I think this is another one where the target audience is broad, but the folks who manage beaches for our coastal communities, the cities and counties, and the ports and waterway operators. This is a chance to listen to a great professional and to get a perspective on how these issues are tackled, what the considerations are. There isn't one answer to how to manage the dynamic shorelines that we all live and work on. And Michael's going to explore that topic from a variety of perspectives. I know he's going to have great guests on there, and I'm really looking forward to Michael Poff's show, Podcast for Building Better Beaches, P4B cubed. I'm so happy to have Michael on ASPN.
Absolutely, and you know, when we were thinking about what shows we wanted to bring to the network, we knew that we would need to cover tourism and hospitality. We knew that was a massive and critically important component to understanding beachfront communities. And we're excited to announce actually two shows to fill that slot. Our first show is with Dan Martin.
Yeah, tourism and hospitality is one of the driving industries of the coast. I think in the last show we talked a little bit about the recent study in Shore and Beach Magazine, the journal of the American Shoreline Beach Preservation Association, on the economics of Florida beaches. It is a stunning industry, and we all, I think, overlook it a little bit because, as I've said, it suffers a little bit from what I call the Hawaiian shirt syndrome, and it's the lack of seriousness economically and politically sometimes that this subject area gets. When we think of the beach and tourism, we think of, I think of Hawaiian shirts, flip-flops,
beach balls
and margaritas, umbrellas, and people just taking it easy. That is all true, but it also happens to be a massive economic sector with a massive implication for the coastal economy and what can be done and the facilities that can be done it should be provided there. So the first show, Dan Martin show.
Dr. Dan Martin
have market and feasibility advisors out of Chicago, Illinois. Dan is an expert on tourism recreation economics. Dan has worked for and advised coastal communities all over the world, in fact, and even inland areas on recreational economics. I think Dan is going to be a great addition to American Shoreline Podcast Network.
No doubt. I mean, his portfolio working on development projects all over the world, in fact, and certainly all over the American shoreline. We're talking about attractions such as parks, and we're talking about attractions such as water parks.
Water parks, zoos. He works on trail systems. He works on all of the kind of facilities that
boat ramps,
and Dan is one of the guys that is often brought in either by private sector investors or public entities that are trying to make significant investment decisions along the shoreline. And the wisdom and economics of those decisions is a complicated calculation. Dan can walk us through that. And we sure wish we had a little bit more about the name of Dan's show. I'd love to know the name. He's been in Saudi Arabia working on the national park system for the nation of Saudi Arabia. And it's been a little hard to reach, but we're looking forward to having Dan on ASPN.
We will get that show named soon, and he promises to be a great host, a great show. But we wanted to round out the other half of this tourism and hospitality area. We know that this is just a critically important area that we're all very interested in. Dan, PhD, is a master of the theoretical economy. We wanted to get somebody, though, who was actually promoting a specific area, and we found the perfect host.
I really think so. Marlis Oster is the CEO and president of the Ventura, California Visitors and Convention Bureau. She grew up in Texas. She grew up in Houston. She hails from the coast and is responsible for the development of the tourism trade in the Ventura area. And having that local perspective and that local government expert in our tourism and hospitality sector, I think is going to add another dimension to the discussions that we're going to have on ASPN.
Absolutely. I mean, she is actively promoting the economic development of and tourism of Ventura. She's been doing this for years, but now is an especially interesting time for Ventura as it was just impacted by the Thomas Fire last year. So the community is looking to kind of use the spur a little bit to get the economy running, and it'll be great to have Marlis document that story for us and share with us what's working, what isn't, and share some best practices, chat with some of her colleagues from around the country.
Right.
This will be a great show that I don't want to miss at all.
It is going to be great. And so these are really give you a flavor of the shows that are going to be on ASPN. The Next Swell with Rob Nixon from South Padre Island. The Capitol Beach Podcast by Derek Brockbank from Washington, D.C. The Beach Shack on real estate. Tyler Buckingham from right here in Austin. Michael Poff from Naples, Florida with the Building Better Beaches Engineering Podcast. A couple of tourism and hospitality shows. That is not the entire spectrum. There are about another 6, and we'll be introducing you to those folks in the next edition of the American Shoreline Podcast flagship show. That's this show. We also are, over the course of September and in October, we're going to have the podcast hosts online with you, so you get a chance to hear from them directly. And I just can't wait to get these shows up and going. And it's a lot of work, but man, is it exciting!
And introducing y'all to these great hosts, one of the things that we're really trying to do with ASPN is foster a relationship between our hosts and you, our listening community. And we just can't wait to get these guys on your air.
Yep. And I think I'm going to take a slight sidetrack here. I want to introduce the listeners to Max Miller, who is our audio engineer and production assistant for ASPN. Max will be working with all of the podcast hosts on the technical preparation and recording and production of the network shows. And it's really great to have Max as part of ASPN. Welcome.
Say hi, Max.
Thanks a lot. But he's not on a mic. So Max, our audio engineer, production assistant, going to do a great job for us and working with all of our podcast hosts to bring their shows to reality for you guys, the listeners.
Well, with that being said, Peter, what do you say we talk a little bit about the hurricane season that appears to be heating up?
Whew. Yeah, I think for all of us coastal practitioners out there, and I think for all of the listeners that are
The hurricane
probably,
season starts in
who
March.
take the time to find and listen to this network and to follow Coastal News Today, we all keep a wary eye on the hurricane season every year. The hurricane season starts in March and goes through October, the end of October. So we're reaching prime time of the hurricane season in America and in the Atlantic and Caribbean basin. The sea surface temperatures are heating up. The storms are coming across from the African continent, and we're starting to see some storms brewing in the Atlantic right now.
Of course, last week I referenced the hurricane that grazed Hawaii and mentioned that it had been relatively quiet. So, of course, as soon as that's said, the Atlantic season began to heat up. We currently have, well, of course, we had Gordon.
We did. I guess earlier this week, last week, Hurricane Gordon hit the Gulf Coast. A mild hurricane, now a tropical depression up over, I guess, Louisiana, and probably by now getting up into Tennessee. But a mild brush. But every time these storms are forming and headed toward the coast, we all keep a wary eye. And we are going to cover hurricanes and storms on the American Shoreline Podcast Network and on Coastal News Today, but we are not going to be the Weather Channel. We're not CNN. There are no raincoats with our logo on it and, our folks standing out in 90-mile-an-hour winds telling you that it's very windy and rainy. No offense to the folks who do that. I think it's a great thing, but what we want to do is dig underneath the hurricane season and look at the policy and economic implications of these massive storms. Right now, we've got a Category 3 storm headed toward Hawaii. Hurricane Olivia is looking like it's online to impact Hawaii. And on the Atlantic side, Hurricane Florence is a Category 2 storm. It's still offshore of the Atlantic coast. We'll see what's happening and watch what's happening with Florence as we go forward. But what I'm interested in doing on our coverage is really talking about the financial implications and the land use implications of this disaster-based funding programs that we've created in the United States. Billions of dollars move as a result of these hurricanes. If I was guessing, I would say right now, there's about $1 billion budget item spinning out in the Atlantic right now with Hurricane Florence. We don't know how it's going to play out, but every time these things form and head toward the American shoreline, we're talking about a lot of money, and we want to cover that.
And of course, the other thing we know is that even the media coverage on these storms tends to be, of course, sensational. Even a very minor storm that parks off the coast of a coastal community can cause extreme erosion damage. So we're going to be keeping a close eye on these and keeping a close eye on all coastal storms. But wanted to take note that we were keeping an eye on them and look forward to covering the 2018 season and hope it's not too bad.
Right. Of course, we're wishing everybody well, and we do want to get through this season quietly. I would love to have the director of the National Hurricane Center on ASPN every November to talk about the season, the hurricane season. If we could get, and we would love to work with the scientists over at the National Hurricane Center and others who study the storms, both in terms of their frequency and intensity, but also the economics of disasters along the shoreline. That's the kind of coverage I think you'll hear on ASPN. And let's hope for some quiet water between now and the end of October.
Indeed.
The third topic we wanted to introduce today and really deals with coastal real estate and a couple of really, I think, incredible studies that have been released recently. I want to talk about how the coastal real estate market is changing and responding to sea level rise and shoreline changes and erosion, tides, all of this stuff is really important for investors, developers, and local government officials who rely on the coastal property tax base to fund and underwrite significant parts of their local government budget. The first study I want to mention and call to the attention of our listeners was recently released by the Union of Concerned Scientists.
Yeah, and this was a really just striking publication to read. Peter, when we were preparing for this show today, and I was remembering back to last year's ASBPA conference, we gathered a bunch of people outside the convention hotel and asked them what was the most striking thing that they learned during that convention. This was in 2017.
Out in Fort Lauderdale.
Almost to an individual. The king tide focus was highlighted. King tides are abnormally high tides that occur usually a few times a year. It's not a scientific term, but what it suggested was that there was a higher frequency of nuisance or sunny day flooding across the American shoreline, and that this was in fact becoming such an issue that it was being talked about at the ASBPA conference.
Right, and we were in Fort Lauderdale, an area in the southeast coast of Florida where king tides are an actual management concern and are having economic implications for local governments and businesses and port waterway operators, homeowners. The Union of Concerned Scientists report that we would like to call your attention to, and you can get the link on our Facebook page right now on Coastal News Today. The study is highlighted in the feed. You can click it there, but it's the Union of Concerned Scientists study underwater, rising seas, chronic floods, and the implications for the U.S. coastal real estate, It is a thorough analysis of something many of us are sort of familiar with, and that is the notion that the changing climate and potential increase in sea levels has significant economic implications for communities all around the American shoreline.
Well, there are more than 300,000 of today's homes that this study says will be at risk in 2045 at a cost of $117.5 billion. So this is obviously something that will rise to the attention of us covering the shoreline. What's really fascinating, though, is this idea that people and real estate investment is beginning to show the changes in investment behavior along shorelines. Properties that are closer to risk zones are losing value, and properties that are less risky are increasing in value. And this will present a whole bunch of interesting socioeconomic issues along the shore, especially in parts of Florida, here in Texas, frankly all over the American shoreline, where it's been conventional wisdom that the highest, most valuable property was right there on the shoreline. More middle-income people and other people would live further away, and that's now starting to change. And I think the Union of Concerned Scientists report, they've identified about 300,000 coastal homes around the United States, $117 billion in value, that are at risk of chronic inundation in the next 17 years by 2045. What they point out is those risks are within the financing time frame for a 30-year mortgage. The real estate market is beginning to respond to those risks. That is on the residential side. The commercial real estate property side is also substantial, and that is just in the near term. So when we think about climate change, or people talk about sea level rise as some sort of theoretical possibility, practitioners along the coast understand, and certainly the real estate market is beginning to understand and factor in what are the risks and the implications financially, both for owners, investors, but also for all of the local governments and state governments that count on property tax revenue and hotel occupancy tax revenues
or accommodation taxes, the variety of revenue streams that are tied to coastal property all around the United States. It's a subject we are going to cover closely on ASBN, and I'm really glad that the Union of Concerned Scientists has put their energy behind a really good factual study that we'd encourage y'all to check out.
And it begs the question what we do with the shoreline. How is this going to be managed? We mentioned on the last episode of the show that one of the things that interests us is this public-private property interface.
Yeah.
And as this flooding becomes more common and the sea level moves inland and it inundates more and more of what's currently dry land, will we allow the beach to move with it, or will we armor?
Yeah.
Of course, the benefits of armoring are to the private property owners with existing property, but it is at the detriment of public access and arguably to the overall economic health of the coastal community.
Yeah.
So this is definitely something that the Union for Concerned Scientists has highlighted well and just can't be ignored. This is probably... Did we rank this number one?
We have it number 4,
we might need to amend.
I still think our number 4 rating was good last show, and because it is a like I think over the next decade, coastal shoreline change, the cost of responding, sea level rise is going to be the most important issue on the American shoreline, but we're just starting to see it happen, and I just want to mention the second study we wanted to call to your attention on Coastal News Today on our Facebook page. There is a posting of this study. I'd encourage you to take a look at it. This one's by a couple of very smart researchers from Harvard University. The study is called Climate Gentrification from Theory to Empiricism in Miami-Dade County, Florida. Boy, this is a solid read, and it really introduced me to something that I had not thought about before. And Tyler, you alluded to this earlier, is that how is the real estate market responding to climate change and sea level rise? And this study is an in-depth analysis of what they're testing, which is called the elevation hypothesis versus what they're calling the nuisance hypothesis. Boy, that sounds pretty technical and researchy, doesn't it? But it's pretty simple. What is the rate of property value increase on shoreline communities, and is it correlated to the elevation of the property? That is the elevation hypothesis. What they tested was, are we seeing a differential increase in real estate values based on the elevation of the property? That's not a foreign concept, because we all are familiar with the idea that real estate values are affected by proximity to the water. The waterfront properties are always the most valuable, we are generally told. And in this case, the physical characteristic isn't proximity to the water, it is now elevation. And what the study finds is that the rate of increase in higher elevation properties in coastal communities is increasing at a faster rate than proximity or other factors that drive real estate value. I think for long-term investors, and I think we're already starting to see how the real estate investment market, real estate investment trusts, institutional investors beginning to shift investments in real estate to areas of lesser risk, and I think this Harvard study really can take you through that. So for those of you in the real estate industry, climate gentrification from theory to empiricism in Miami-Dade County, Florida, find the study on the Coastal News Today Facebook page, and great study, in-depth, deep dive. If we can, I'd love to have the authors of this study on the American Shoreline Podcast Network.
I would love to have them on my show. In fact, it would be fitting. Reading here from the abstract, it says that the findings support a validation of both hypotheses and suggest the potential existence of consumer preferences that are based in part on perceptions of flood risk and or observations of flooding. These preferences and perceptions are anticipated to be amplified by climate change in a manner that reinforces the proposition that climate change impacts will affect the marketability and valuation of property. That is a major topic that we are looking for empirical data that would suggest that people are beginning to include the changing climate into their value assessments of coastal property
and investment decisions. And we're not really getting to the subject matter of what climate change is or what causes it. What we're looking for is how that issue is being factored into the real world in terms of real estate valuation and real estate investment. The flip side of that analysis is going to include what is going on in the insurance market, and how are insurance providers responding to the increasing risks of climate change and sea level rise. These are real world economic discussions. These are not theoretical discussions. That's what we're going to be tracking on ASPN.
And we look forward to it. It should be a fascinating thing.
It really should. So that gives you a flavor of the kind of subjects we intend to cover on ASPN through this expert panel of hosts. We really look forward to interviewing all of our hosts, bringing them to you, learning more about what their intentions are in the subject areas that they all practice in. The nice thing about having these professionals is we're not asking a general journalist to tell us that there are a lot of dead fish on the southeast coast of Florida or the southwest side of Florida. We want to explore in depth what the policy choices are that are underlying these resulting uses and events on the American shoreline. So ASPN is a place for high-level conversation, a great place to learn and to explore areas of the coastal profession that you may not work in every day. Tyler and I have had the benefit of working in a variety of coastal communities on a variety of different issues. We're real generalists. We've been expert in the development of, for example, special property tax districts to support shoreline management programs or coastal parks. We've done coastal trails. We've done land conservation. We've done wetland permitting. We've done erosion response planning and land use planning. We've covered a lot of ground, and we've covered a lot of ground in different communities. And our experience from going place to place and from subject to subject is it is useful to understand the other silos and the other professions. We're going to have expert guides in each of those, Tyler, and I think that's going to be great for our listeners.
Yeah, I mean, you learn so much from people who aren't in your same silo. I had the experience of going shore fishing on the Padre Island National Seashore a couple of summers ago. And the way that works is this is about a 60-mile long national seashore, so it's managed by the National Park System. And it's a driving beach. The way that you access that 60 miles is to drive it. And when you're fishing, what you do is you get in the car and you drive along the beach, and you're looking out over the water for birds kind of circling around over a bait ball. And you'll move quickly into that spot and cast your line out and attempt to catch some of the predatory fish that are eating the bait fish. And in the course of doing this, I camped out a couple nights out there and got to know a couple of the regulars. One fella named Meyer, who I'm hoping we can get on the show at least soon, is an English guy, immigrated to Texas, to America, now is a citizen, and he runs a small business manufacturing and inventing fishing tackle. Mm-hmm. Now, this man knows basically everything there is to know about that shoreline. He is not an engineer, he is not a scientist per se, but he is out there every day, and he is absolutely fascinated by the space and enjoys learning as much as he can about it and about the Texas shoreline. It just goes to show you how when you step out of your daily bubble and begin to experience other people's interface with the shore, you can learn a whole lot.
Yeah, and it's a good reminder that we know that our listenership is primarily going to be people who live, work, and reside along the American shoreline. And we also know and understand that although you may be a port director or maybe a tourism director or run a beach, that as a resident of the coast, you're probably also interested in the quality of life along the shoreline, what's going on in real estate, what's going on in recreational opportunities, what's going on in public rights versus private rights along the shore. We want to treat our listenership as people who live there and love the coast and are inspired in their professional choice to be working in and around the American shoreline. And that's why I think it's a matter of respect that we start ASPN with the notion that our listenership is not siloed. It is not simply going to be a group of people who are going to listen to the Ports and Waterways show and not care about the real estate show or the Capitol Beach podcast or what Rob Nixon says about access and private rights versus public rights. Those topics matter to the community of the American shoreline. That's our listenership. And folks, I've said this before, there are 254 counties directly on the American shoreline, representing a population of about 123 million people. It is a huge economy. The issues that we face on the American shoreline are interrelated, and the ASPN and Coastal News Today are designed to really explore that space, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I really can't wait to see the network up and going.
It's been great. To all of you who have liked and subscribed to our podcast, thank you very much. If you have not done so already, please do. You can also go to coastalnewstoday.com to our splash page and sign up for our newsletter and stay up to date on everything coastal, everything we're covering.
Right. So about the end of September, we hope to have the full-blown news service up on coastalnewstoday.com. In the interim, we're existing in social media platforms, getting used to social media, what we're going to bring forward on Facebook and Twitter, and how we're going to use that platform. The full-blown news aggregation service will be at the end of September, as I said. And in the meantime, we're going to be shaking the sand off our shoes and getting ASPN up and running and getting our pod hosts into the system. So the big reveal, I think, is going to be at the ASBPA conference in Galveston, October 30th to November 2nd. And listeners, go online at coastalnewstoday.com, like us on Facebook, get your name on the list. You'll start getting every podcast in your email box. So, Tyler, I think it's going to be a really great experience to put this together and to bring this information out there to the readers in all kinds of sectors on the American shore.
I second that very much. It's been so much fun putting this together so far with all these great hosts, working with you, Peter, working with Max over here, our engineer. This is going to be we are building this to be a lasting resource for all of you out there working on the shoreline. So we couldn't be more thrilled about it.
Well, thanks a lot, Tyler, and we will keep working and look forward to seeing you all on the next edition of the American Shoreline Podcast, our flagship show. Welcome to Coastal News Today, and welcome to ASPN.
Adios, everybody.
Adios.